Gary, I'm glad to have you in today, man.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet you. I've been listening to your podcast on YouTube, and man, you've been doing this for a while. 2015, I think, or 2013?
2014, I think, maybe 2015. I can't remember. It was April, either 2014 or 2015. So, yeah.
So
I was really the first mob podcast in the United States, I think. There was one other guy back east in New York that I don't think he's not still doing it. I don't even think he lasted very long, but I'm the first one of all the mob podcasts.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, man. I've always been told about the Kansas City and the history to the mob, and I know some guys that grew up in the Northeast area that have talked about mob guys living there in the historic Northeast, and I've been through the North End and seen all the Italian flags and stuff like that, but I never really I didn't really put much into it, and I've always been a big fan of mob movies, Goodfellas, Casino, all that stuff, but I'm really happy to learn, some stuff today about Kansas City mob, man. I mean, it was the Savella family, correct?
Correct. That was the main family. He took over in the 50s as the boss.
Okay. And where did they start? Like what year and kind of time period did they start around here in Kansas City?
Well, you have to go all the way back to the turn of the century, really. I don't know what exact year it was. I'm not a big student of that early mafia stuff, but in every city, probably Kansas City East, every city in the United States at the turn of the century, there was a huge influx of people from southern Italy, like Naples south to Sicily. And they came to the United States looking for jobs. One place like in Missouri, they went down by Joplin, Missouri. There was big lead mines down there, and so they were looking for work because there wasn't any work in Italy. So they come to the United States, mainly go to New York. From New York, they go out to Chicago and all the other big steel belt cities, where there was any kind of job opportunities, and Kansas City. A little bit in Omaha, but Kansas City was one of the farthest west outposts, shall we say, and St. Louis, of course. And when they came, they brought the good and the bad. They had this long tradition of mafia, especially out of Sicily, but they also had the Camorra and the 'Ndrangheta, which is more on the mainland around Naples and southern, the boot, if you will, on the boot heel of Italy. And they brought these criminal organizations with them, these young men. When they come over, they don't have much to do over there. There was kind of a big crackdown at the time around the turn of the century, and so they bring the mafia, the organized crime with them, settle in these big cities, and the first really iteration or the first evidence of this is the old Black Hand days. They would send out letters to usually successful Italian merchants and people that had, got something going pretty quickly and tried to extort money from them. And they call them Black Hand letters because they have it signed with take a palm print of a black or draw a black hand and a dagger and make some threats on it and send that extortion letter to them. And then if they didn't pay, they'd get their business burned, or maybe they'd get killed themselves, or maybe they threatened to kill a family member. And so it was an extortion racket mainly, and they preyed on their own people because at the time, when the Italians get here, the Irish had gotten here earlier, and the Germans got before that, and the English got here first, if you think about the United States and the way it's developed. So they've got all the good jobs. So the Irish are the last ones here, and when new immigrants come, many times the government jobs are the first ones that you can really find as you start pulling yourself up by your bootstraps from, if you can't start a business or a restaurant or something, you can't really get a job somewhere because you're not part of the dominant ethnic group. Well, you get a job with the government. So the Irish are the cops by now and running the city government and having those kinds of jobs and really into politics. So then the Italians come in and that's, now they've got to start organizing and getting into politics, and they have their gangs, and there was Irish gangs before the Italian gangs, and that's just the immigrant way, and it's replicated in every city, and same way in Kansas City. Then Prohibition comes along. And the old Mustache Petes by then are, they're like, this is the 20s, and they were, 40 or 50 years old. So they're getting older. So the young guys that have been coming over are already over here, the grown-up children of these early men that came here in the late 1800s. Well, they're moving into this criminal organization. They see the money in bootlegging, huge amount of money. And they, in The Godfather, there's a really famous scene in a conflict early on where Don Corleone is the young upstart, and he kills off the old black-hander. And we don't have that in Kansas City. They had it in New York City. Lucky Luciano, they killed Joe the Beast Mazzaria and another guy named Maranzano. Killed a couple of those old Mustache Pete guys that weren't really getting with the modern game era of getting organized. They brought Jews in. They brought other ethnicities in. And is that a dog? I'm sorry. Okay.
I told you you'd hear it. Hear it.
All right. They brought.
We live right down the street from a fire station. Okay. So
they brought other ethnicities in, and they start organizing. And Lucky Luciano formed the National Crime Commission. Well, in Kansas City, these early guys, Joe DiGirolamo and his brother Pete, and his name Ballesteri, and then they had the five. I think they called them the Five Iron Men, and I just named two of them. There was Tano Lococo and Joe Falardo, and Tano Lococo and Falardo are kind of important because they go on to modern times. Anyhow, there was these five men. There was Sugar Shack Gang. They needed to corner the market on all the sugar. That's why they called them a Sugar Shack Gang. So they were making booze. They were making alcohol. And then they had the connections with Capone in Chicago. That's where the early connections with the Capone were in Chicago, to bring Capone beer down here because he was making beer up there and getting the good whiskey in from Canada. And so it became this nationwide network that the mafia became involved in, or had to get organized to do it. So that's kind of the history, the basis of how it started in Kansas City, just like in every other city. We just didn't have that early kind of a mob war of killing off the old Godfather, the old Mustache Pete. For some reason. I don't know why. They didn't have those personalities.
And Prohibition tends to create families in that sense, right? Organized crime in that.
Right. And it lends itself to organization. If you think about it, you've got to have supply lines. You've got to have retail outlets. You've got to have collection people. You've got to have people that take care of the money. You've got to have people that maybe get new sources of supply. And so you have to have all that to then make that run. And the mafia already has an organization. They've got a boss and they've got an underboss and they've got a consigliere who's the advisor, and then they've got capos or capo regimes, which will be crew leaders or crew chiefs or skippers or whatever. They have different names for them. Capo is one of the more common names, I think. And I think the original was a capodicina, which means that comes from the early Roman armies where you were the captain of 10 men. And so that's they had that organization, and they developed it through Prohibition and through bootlegging, and then made a lot of money.
That's fascinating. A lot of things have ties to the Roman Empire, doesn't it?
Yeah, really.
So the head of the Civella family here, who I've heard you talk about him in your podcast, which is called Gangland Wire.
Right, Gangland Wire.
Gangland Wire. What was his name?
Nick Civella.
Nick Civella. Okay. And what was his upbringing here?
His father was like maybe he had a produce cart or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he did, but he was a small businessman just trying to make it. And Nick Civella was born around the turn of the century, 1910 maybe, 1905, 1910. So, he's born in the United States. He grows up in the United States, and actually his father had said that he was victimized by some of these old Mustache Petes. But Nick is just this young guy who's extremely bright. And that's a lot of these guys. See, what happens is they're bright young men and they're ambitious, but the greater culture keeps them squeezed out. They don't bring them in. They don't allow them opportunities. I mean, it still goes on today.
Yeah.
Because they speak a different language, or if they don't, they have an accent, and Italians were darker complected than the Irish or the Germans. So, and there's always that prejudice. And so these guys have to make their own way. Here this guy is really bright, really smart, a good organizer. Men follow him. And, he goes to the streets to make money. And he has a little gang. He has a little gang early on, and a guy named Bugsy Ainch, A-N-C-H, Bugsy Ainch. And two or three other guys, and they're stealing tires. That was a big deal, was go out and steal tires. And then there was other mob guys that had tire shops out here that would buy them from you, and then they'd sell them back out to the public. That was kind of a big crime at one time and during those years. So he was stealing tires and doing things like that. And he actually was robbing some games, and he robbed some protected games. Gambling, that's one thing. The mafia is like the police for the people that can't call the police. Mm-hmm. So if you're connected to the mafia and then some other criminal tries to victimize you, then you've got the mafia to back you up. If you have a conflict with another criminal, then you can go to a mob guy and he'll sit down and, listen to both sides and make a decision, and people will usually abide by that. They'll go by that.
So was there already a family here before the Savella family?
Yeah, but there wasn't, and if there was, I don't know it. It wasn't like a name.
Gotcha.
It was a loosely organized family.
Kind of like crews around the city.
Right. I mean, it was all around the city market. They knew each other. They all hung out down there at a couple of different pool rooms at the time, but there wasn't. It's not come through that in my studies that where there's like this family, like there was in New York. There's been a little more attention paid to it in New York. You talk about like Capone, they paid attention to who was up there before him and who was up there before him. But if it is, I guess I didn't care enough to go that far back to try to figure it out. But when Savella, he had some problems. He has been the man since the war, since World War II. We go through Prohibition and then Depression, and after Prohibition, they have to find another way to make money because you can't make money off of booze anymore. And so that's when they went into gambling big time. They had a race wire here, which is connected up to other cities in the United States, so you could go in and make a bet on a horse race, and you could get immediate results each time a horse race. On the winning of a horse race, you would have like a wire room and a place people can go and put down a bet on a horse race anywhere that was on that circuit, that was on that wire, and then you could get those results right away.
That was actually pretty popular, wasn't it, back then?
Yeah, it was.
There's actually one pretty close to here, isn't there? Horse races, I think, out in Kansas, I want to say.
Oh, let me think. They closed the one down just in the Wyandotte County.
Did they?
I know. There's one in a really old one that would go back to these times almost in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Okay.
Oaklawn's the name of it.
I swore I've seen some people around locally that have been to one that's still open, but I'm not sure. I've never been to one before.
Yeah.
So, okay.
There used to be one in Omaha that goes way back called Exarban.
So they started getting into the whole gambling thing.
Yeah, that's when they went into gambling big time, running games. And that's where Nick got in trouble. He was robbing some protected games. Mm-hmm. And he got in so much trouble that he had to run out of town. They killed his paw partner, Bugsy Ainch. They killed him, and when that happened, he had to leave town. He was out of town. He was in Chicago for a while. He came back probably around the war. It's really interesting in mob history. There's like this gap. You don't know much about what happened during World War II because those guys were all drafted and all fighting too. The best we know about World War II is Lucky Luciano made a deal with the Navy to get guys to watch the docks and help them out with anything they'd need on the docks in exchange for if they would get him out of the penitentiary. And they did in the end and sent him back to Sicily too. But after the war, Nick comes back, and he left, and he came back, and then he had to leave again. After the war, he comes back, and he's starting to make some moves. He actually is the driver for somebody who had risen to be the boss during this time, a man named Tony Gizzo. And it's like when they brokered the deal up in Chicago for him to come back, he came back as Gizzo's driver, and the driver is usually a guy that very likely could be the next boss. Many times the driver's a really significant job. Not always, but many times it is. And he comes back as the driver for Tony Gizzo. He had one time that they made one more attempt on him that I know of. It was the last attempt on his life that we know about. He's sitting down here at Truman in Cleveland. There's a liquor store down there. He's sitting in his car. It's like a 46, I don't know, Chevy or Plymouth or something. Sitting in his car, and for some reason, he scooted over to the passenger seat, and a guy who was a Jackson County deputy sheriff named Cuccia, and I forgot his first name, Cuccia, slides in there, and he's sitting behind the driver's wheel, and two men pull up with, I think one was a submachine gun, the old Chicago typewriter, the old Tommy gun, and a shotgun, and they just start blasting that driver, and they kill Cuccia, and Nick Savella just rolls out of the car and takes off out through the woods out behind the liquor store down there over there at Truman in Cleveland, because it wasn't quite built up like it was today. Man. And but he survived that, and you know, he somehow, after this brokering deal with his contacts he'd made in Chicago, he is now on his way.
Okay. And how did he make those contacts in Chicago?
You know, I'm not sure. He's a personable guy. He's a personable guy to those guys. Not a very personable guy to law enforcement, but he's a real personable guy. I've talked to people that knew him, you know, on the streets, business people, a secretary at one lawyer's office, and she said, "Oh, he was just the nicest man you ever wanted to meet." And I've heard that from other people. And so he's bright. And he must have done some stuff for somebody up there, but we don't really know much of that history.
And did you say he came from Italy to the United States, or was he born here?
No, his dad came from Italy, Sicily, maybe.
So maybe some type of family ties from the mainland?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. That's a common thing is you have, I just talked to a guy today about how the mob developed in St. Louis, and I said, why are they so close to Detroit? Like, we're close to Chicago. That family in St. Louis is close to Detroit. He said because people came from the same area of Italy to St. Louis as they did to Detroit and Cleveland too. So you have those old ties that you may or may not know.
So he ended up making ties with Chicago, and did they give him some sort of blessing or something like that to start his the family? Is that what you call them? Like the family, basically, I guess? Yeah,
no doubt about it. The structure was already here in place. There was already a boss and an underboss. He already had the structure here when he came back.
Gotcha.
And he moves into that structure laterally pretty good.
Oh,
because he comes back as the boss's driver.
Gotcha.
There was other people. There's a lot more going on in Kansas City.
Do you think him going to the military kind of helped him?
He didn't go to the military.
Oh, he didn't. I thought you said he went to world.
No, I was just talking about during World War II.
Okay.
A lot of these guys went to the military.
Gotcha.
A lot of them did.
But he didn't.
No, he didn't.
Okay. So he ended up coming back there and kind of stepped into position of being the boss. Then.
Well, the driver for the boss. When he first came back, he was the driver for the boss, Tony Gizzo.
So then how did he start making his way up after that?
Well, he just kept his mouth shut and did what he was told to do. And, and the next thing we know, he's the boss.
Yeah, okay. And then there's also a Sparrow family, right? I've heard. And
Sparrow,
Sparrow. And what was were they in the same area, or how did that all work?
That's kind of a horse of a different color, shall we say.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's as Nick, he ascends the boss. He actually goes back east to the Appalachian Convention, the famous mob convention in upstate New York, where all these mobsters from all over the United States are caught by the police running out of the place because there's a New York State Patrol sergeant named Cresswell. And he was suspicious about this guy named Barbera, who lived up and had an estate way up in like Binghamton and way up in the north part of New York State. And he found out this guy had a whole lot of people over at his house. And he had heard some other stuff about him being involved in Prohibition and being involved as a bootlegger years before that. This is 1957. And he gets a bunch of other troopers and finds out that there's like, 20 or 30 really high-end cars and from out-of-state license plates and all that over there. And so they just pull a raid on it. And these guys see these state troopers coming up, and they like jump into their cars, running out. Well, the troopers had a roadblock set up, so they just stopped them all, and then started taking license numbers and started writing and getting their driver's license, writing down names, their crow names. They took a lot of them in, and Nick Savella was there with one of these old Sugar Shack gang men, who was an older man than him, named Joe Filardo, who actually owns Roma Bakery for your Kansas City listeners. They still buy their bread today. He owned Roma Bakery, and he was, one of the original bootlegging mafia bosses, and he was there to introduce Nick Savella in 1957 as the new boss of Kansas City to the National Commission. It was a National Commission, is what it is, National Crime Commission, or National Crime Syndicate. Is what was going on up there. So that gets you up to, when he really consolidates his power and is known nationwide as the boss of Kansas City.
Oh, okay. I see.
Then later on, the Sparrow Boys are more of my age, and a little older. Maybe they'd be like the oldest one, if he was still alive, would be like maybe 90 today, and Nick Savella would be like 110 or something today. But the Sparrow Boys were just a large family, had a bunch of boys, grew up over in Little Italy area, had a bunch of cousins that were their age, and they just... And
Little Italy, that's over in
Columbus Park.
Columbus Park,
yeah.
Okay.
Kind of people talk about old historic Northeast, and talk about farther east is historic Northeast, east of Paseo and north of Independence Avenue. Well, Little Italy is down there between the City Market and Troost and 6th Street or Independence Avenue, and where it drops down over the hill to 3rd Street, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the original Italian conclave right down there.
Gotcha.
To move out, that was like moving out to the suburbs when they moved out of Columbus Park, what we call Columbus Park today, or Little Italy, and moved over to the Northeast. That's like moving out to the suburbs for them back then.
Okay. So what did they consider the historic Northeast? What did they consider that?
Well, that's just a big neighborhood.
Because that was big Crown Victorian houses. I mean, it's pretty beautiful up there.
Yeah, originally at one time, the big houses, at one time, a lot of the lumber barons, I think they were, people that owned lumber yards and things like that, lived up over on part of one of the streets, and the rest of it was all working class, blue collar primarily, houses all along north of Independence Avenue, clear to Hardesty, or almost, Independence, really.
Is it true that there's tunnels that come out of those houses? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, you always hear about that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Yeah, and I never really found one. There is one I know of that's an old Prohibition era tunnel. I had another guy get hold of me and tell me about one, and I mentioned Tano LaCoco lives at 300 block of Jackson, which is over in Old Northeast, over by Van Brunt. I don't know how many of your listeners are, a lot of them from Kansas City, I assume, so they'll know these place names. And they said there's a tunnel from his house back to out to his garage, and then there's a set of brothers over on Van Brunt that married sisters back in they had a house, one of these two really nice little brick bungalows on Van Brunt, and they were always going back and forth to each other's houses, so they dug a tunnel so you didn't have to go outside. So the tunnel, and there's a Prohibition era tunnel, I know, because I saw it down on Gillis, and this family lived on the east of Gillis, down in Little Italy, or in Columbus Park, just up from Happy Gillis's. And there's a tunnel from one house under Gillis and comes up into another house. And in this one house, where the tunnel, one end of the tunnel, there's a great big concrete vat that was poured in the basement. It wasn't carried in, it was poured and made in that basement. And that's where they put the grapes and let the grapes ferment, and made the wine. There's a drain to the bottom of it, and they bottled the wine. And the granddaughter of the family was telling me, these are family stories that were passed down. Then they stored the wine. Then they took it through the tunnel to a relative's house across the street, and then they would go take it. This was during Prohibition, because it had to be on the down low. Yeah. So then they would take it out around and sell it to people. So there are tunnels around. They're just not quite what people think they are.
Yeah, the stories have been told. So we kind of get up to where I wanted to talk to about your career. Where's your upbringing? Like, where were you? Where were you born at? You were born here in Kansas City?
No. I think I was born in Kansas City, but I was raised in Plattsburgh, Missouri.
Raised in Plattsburgh,
50 miles north of here, a small farming town.
So you ended up making your way down to Kansas City when you got older?
Right. 18 years old, I headed to the city. I was not going to stay on the farm.
Yeah, not a farm guy.
No, not a farm guy.
And so what was one of your first jobs down here? Were you, because I know you were a detective, but I'm sure you made your way up to that. Where'd you start out?
Well, and I worked at the Ford plant first.
Oh, really?
Anybody out there that's looking for a job, they're always hiring out there, and it's a good job. It's harder than hell, though.
Oh, I know.
But I worked there 5 years, and from the time I was like 19, 20 until I was 25 or so, and it was hard, and I hated it, and then the Kansas City Police Department started hiring. They had the e-tax you pay today was designed to hire 350 more additional policemen on top of what they had. So we had the riots in 1968, and everybody's scared, and it seemed like there's a lot of crime, and the police department is kind of low, and it's basically the same as it has been for back to the end of the war, probably back to the early 50s. Police department.
And what riots were that? I'm sorry.
Well, there was civil disorder, shall we say, after Martin Luther King was killed.
Oh, okay. So there was riots here as well.
Yeah, in 1968. Okay. Yeah, a lot of fires and shootings and all that. I mean, it's like they have any other part of the United States. We had it here in Kansas City. So this 68. Well, by 71, they've gotten this e-tax passed to hire 350 more policemen. And they got a lot of federal money coming in to do some different, community programs and trying to make the police department a little more touchy-feely than it had been. And so I saw these ads, and I was tired of beating my hands to death putting parts on a car. I started out
on the assembly line.
Started out putting front motor mounts on, ended up putting back motor mounts on in 5 years. It's good steady work and a decent rate of pay and great benefits, but
Yeah, those jobs can be hard, especially for some people. And you kind of get lost in your head. You want something more, and then it's just, it's not a bad job at all if some people can do it, but, some people are made differently, and you just, it's hard to stay there and just Groundhog Day every day.
Yes, exactly. So, they were advertising, I made application and went on the police department. Yeah. You start out in patrol, started out downtown, and then I had a chance to go out to the 150 sector and took over 154. It was my first regular sector car, and that was 35th to 39th Paseo to Prospect, and it was a pretty high crime area. They were looking for people to go out there. I remember sitting in the roll call, and this one guy said, "Oh, I'm not going out there." I said, "Throw me in, coach." Put me in the briar patch. Yeah. So I went out and started working the 154 and the East Side car, one of the East Side cars, and had a great time and started really having real crimes, like finding real dope dealers and finding guns on people and finding, having people lived in the neighborhood that were real actual armed robbers that you'd have warrants on them, we'd go after them and, things like that. The real police work, not writing tickets or helping people downtown or towing off parked cars or whatever. So that's, I did that, and then I was a station detective after about 3 years, I think, working in uniform patrol, and then they had a station detective unit. We worked burglaries, house burglaries, and larcenies, and kind of the lesser crimes. And so I went inside and was a detective for the next 3 years, and then they disbanded that at the time. And I was going to go to a TAC unit and had it all lined up, and opening intelligence unit. A friend of mine that actually I had known since I was about 5 years old. Lived in the adjoining farm to ours, had come on the police department just a little bit before I did, and he'd gotten in the intelligence unit. And, I didn't know a lot about what they did, but I knew it had to be cool. And I knew they worked on nothing but the big guys. And I knew they didn't have to wear uniforms, and they had slick cars, and it's what I wanted. So Bobby got hold of me. He said, "Hey," we got an opening down here. And I said, "Put me in, coach, again."
What were you first tasked to when you started in that?
Bobby and I immediately became his partner.
Mm-hmm. Kind of shadow him. See the ropes. Yeah.
And Bobby and I, never forget, Larry Wisher, Sergeant Wisher, called us in. He said, "I got this used car lot out here at Gregory and Troost. And he said, we hear that there's some mob guys coming around there, hanging out there. And I think he probably got it from the FBI. I don't know where he got it. Never did ask. He said, I want you guys to go out and just take a look. So, okay. So we went out and we drive around it and drive by it. And, it's there. And, it's got D tags. And I think we saw a couple of tags in there. So you pick up tags and you drive around a little bit and just, you couldn't really sit on it because there was no place to park where you could be in with a bunch of other cars. There was one place you could get kind of close and be hidden by other cars. So we'd sit there for a little bit, but you were going to get burnt pretty quickly. And picked up enough tag numbers and, hey, there are some mob guys going there. And there was one guy named Jimmy Duarte who was a real deal made guy. And we saw him there several times. And then we, did the paperwork research, found out who owned the D-tag there, and then found out who that was, and who had the utilities there, and who owned the ground, all that kind of background work, especially after we found out Jimmy Duarte was going in and out there, because Duarte was a heavyweight. He was a guy that he had the Savella family downtown. See, the organized crime, they're pretty structured. Well, Jimmy, his uncle was Tano Lococo, who was one of the Five Iron Men, or one of the guys that in the old Sugar Shack gang, and so he was a mafia legacy. He had been in the penitentiary he'd just gotten out for about the last 3 or 4 years for it was a conspiracy to really take over a whole county down in Grove, Oklahoma. They had bribed a prosecutor, the county prosecutor. They had bribed the sheriff. They were lining up all the clubs around this Grand Lake, which was kind of a Grand Lake of the Cherokees. It's kind of like the Lake of the Ozarks at the time for northeastern Oklahoma. So they were going to line it up. They were going to have gambling and strippers and prostitutes and no liquor law violations from the sheriff's office or anything like that. Open county is what he was trying to get lined up, and he was getting it lined up, and they tried to kill one of the club owners. What was his name? Was Roberts. He would not fall in line. He didn't want to go along with this program, so one of Bishop's, his kind of ace number one Boone Coon, as they call him, is his guy, and another contact Duarte had out of Tulsa got this guy and took him for a ride, and they shot him, but they didn't kill him. So he testified against him, and the whole thing fell down.
Shit.
And Jimmy was just out of the penitentiary from that conviction. So that's what kind of a mob. He was a real deal mob guy and an old school mob guy. He was not a wannabe. He was not just a good burglar or anything like that. He was a real deal mob guy that did racketeering kind of activities.
How does one become a made man?
Oh, you gotta pay your dues. You kind of have to be born into it or close to be born into it, and they have to know a lot about you since you were a teenager and grew up over here in Northeast or Little Italy, and know a lot about
ties back to Italy.
No, you don't have ties back to Italy. Probably your family does, because you got to be a Sicilian. Or Italian. I guess you don't have to be Sicilian. You have to be at least Italian. At least later years, they've changed the rules a little bit, they say, and sometimes it's just your father has to be Italian. So
gotcha.
I don't know. But you just have to come up through the criminal networks, come up through the little street gangs, every one of them. Comes up through the street gangs. They do certain crimes. They do different crimes, and then they do stuff for the guys that are actually, members of the organization. They do crimes for them or with them, and they'll become good thieves, and they'll bring them in, and they'll kind of mentor them a little bit. And like when you go out and you go do a jewelry store robbery, and you got pretty good swag, and then you take it to the mob, and they fence it for you, and they take a little piece of the action, or you're a really good booster, and you keep bringing really a lot of clothes or records or whatever, or you're able to go out and get connections and take off a whole truckload of suits or some kind of high, TVs or something like that. You're a really good earner, really good thief, or you got some other kind of scam going that you're a really good earner, and you show up. They have the social club, the Trap, down there at 5th and Troost, we call it the Trap. It was the Northview Social Club, or the Columbus Park Social Club at one time. It's still down there, actually. If you go on my YouTube channel, I do a little mob tour on my motorcycle and pull up in front of the Trap down there and show you the Trap and talk about what happened there. Yeah, I've gone, if anybody wants to go on my YouTube channel, I've got a motorcycle tour of Kansas City in a playlist and go to all the different places, and I stop and tell you about them. So anyhow, you show up down there and people like you, and maybe you catch a case and you don't say anything. You keep your mouth shut. You don't take anybody down. You don't ever snitch. And then somebody likes you and they start bringing you in, bring you a little closer, say, this is a guy that, we can work with. So that's kind of how it works. You just kind of work your way up slowly but surely. And
how close are the movies to how that ceremony goes? I've seen some movies kind of portray how it is.
It's dead on. They've read the different accounts that people
like I've seen
done.
The Sopranos. I was a pretty big fan of the Sopranos series. And, they had the burning of the card and all that stuff.
Well, I've read several different accounts of it from people who became informants or just cooperating witnesses later on, and it's just right down the line, just like that.
Okay, so you were in charge of watching that dealership.
Yeah, we sat and watched that dealership, and we started seeing all the people that were coming and going, so you put together Duarte's organization. These are the people that he does stuff with. That's what intelligence does. Intelligence just gathers information and then catalogs it, and then we move on to something else. Maybe because
you ever get bored of that?
I never did. I never did. It was kind of
sitting
cool.
there for hours.
Yeah, no, I never did. That never bothered me. Really? I had a good enough imagination, I guess. Because we've sat like on a month on the place.
What year is this?
This is 1976, 77. And let's see, I was going to tell you something.
Before cell phones gave us short memory loss?
Really.
Short attention spans?
Yeah. But we developed a lot of different people out of that. And like the Bureau at that same time, this is kind of how intelligence works. Like the Kansas City Police Department, the local police never really did anything making cases on the mafia, any of the mafia guys, because most of their crimes were, more sophisticated, and you never caught them in the act, and nobody ever told on anybody, or nobody ever told you so you could like follow them around and catch them in the act, like a lot of these other crimes, and they don't make mistakes. They're smart. They check everything out before they go actually do something. But
were people more in those communities scared of saying anything on because I'm sure there was a lot of extortion and stuff like that as well, from what I've read. But they were just too scared to go to the police if something happened.
If they knew anything, they weren't going to say anything. They're like, they're that way today. People on my Facebook group, people just idolize these guys, and
why do you think that is? Just a culture
of a Robin Hood scenario. It's kind of like these are people that can get away with stuff that I wish I could. I don't have to answer any authority.
Yeah, but at the same time, weren't they taxing their own people and their businesses and stuff like that?
People have to kick up. Yeah. If you're going to be part of them and you're going to get any protection from them. See, at one time during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all the way back to probably the 30s, they had a lot of connections in the courthouse and in the police department and other businesses. That's why the feds always had to make the cases, because you couldn't make a case and get it through Jackson County Courthouse at one time in Kansas City. There's egregious examples of that. In 1951, was it 51? No, it goes all the way back to the 30s. They shot and killed a guy, and the county sheriff, Tom Bash, stumbled into this shooting. They're trying to kill this bar owner. And the sheriff and his deputy jump out, and they had to enter in a gun battle with these three mobsters. One of them was Tano Lococo, who I mentioned, who was Jimmy Duarte's uncle. Tano Lococo and Charlie Gargata and Sam Scola. And they kill Sam Scola. Tano Lococo runs off, and they never catch him. And they corner Charlie Gargata, and he gives up. He's expended his shells anyhow, and he hadn't hit anybody, and he's cornered, and he gives up. And they charge him with killing this Ferris Anthon. And, they pulled up and they saw it. And he had to shoot out with the police, and they got his gun. Well, finally, when it gets to trial in Jackson County Courthouse 3 years later, the gun's missing. And it was mistagged, and they've actually attributed it to a Kansas City policeman who then did something and screwed up the gun. And by the time it was all over, he copped a plea. Instead of the murder, he copped a plea to possession of a stolen firearm and did about 2 years or something. So that's that's kind of so Kansas City Police Department, and we just didn't have the manpower or the budget to do what it takes like the FBI does. So what we do is we gather information. So I'm watching all these guys going in and out of Jimmy Duarte or this car dealer, and got an informant that was in there, and he starts telling me about some of the Spiro brothers and some of the stuff that they were off into in another area of the city. So we feed that to the FBI. We see these other guys, and they get copies of reports. So they've got a bank scam going on at the time where these guys are getting bank loans. There's a friendly banker over at the Shawnee State Bank over in Kansas, and he's approving these loans, and they're never going to pay them back. They have no intention of paying them back, and he gets a kickback from it. And, of course, the mob guy that set it up gets a little piece of the action. And then the guys that are getting the loans, who are eventually going to have bad credit, but they didn't seem to care, they get the rest of the money. But a lot of those guys are going in and out of there. So then they say, oh, okay, this is part of a mob deal. It's like, because you just don't know when you first walk into something. And another thing about that surveillance, it was kind of cool. It was right across the street. We couldn't sit on it. So right across the street was a cemetery. So we went to the cemetery. The guy that ran the cemetery out there, I can't remember the name of it, that big-ass cemetery out there at Gregory and Truce. Went to the manager of that and said, hey, set us up one of these tents right over here next to the street, close as you can to the street where there's grave sites, and put the flaps on all the way around. And it was kind of cool. So it wasn't like, it wouldn't be untoward to have the flaps up. And then we'll get inside there, and then we can get our camera real close, right straight across the street, and we can just sit there and take pictures all day. And so we watched them for about a week, and then finally we had to back out of the tent because we knew that was going to be burned up. Finally, somebody's going to say, "Boy, that tent's been up there a long time." So that was kind of fun.
Man, that's pretty crazy, man. Just I can't imagine having to sit there for hours trying to monitor all that stuff, man. That's a lot. So what did that end up leading up to? Like in any major?
No, like I said, it's all part of the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. It was part of helping them make sense of who was getting these loans, and because some of the guys are going there, so then they look at some of the other guys going in there. Mm-hmm. Then they could go down when they started pulling paperwork and say, oh yeah, that guy has got a loan too. Mm-hmm. So then Duarte has connections with this guy. Carl Spiro was down there a lot, and he met this guy named Leonard Krigo down there. And then about a year later, when Carl Spiro, we had the Spiro-Savella War, this was the early days of that, and Carl was meeting people down there.
What year was that?
1976, I think, okay. 75.
And you were a detective already at that time?
Yeah. 77. I went in the unit, intelligence unit in 76. So we started that other surveillance. So about 77. The germination, the start of that war really started in 76, but they hadn't really come to the surface yet. And so he was down there meeting people, and I developed an informant from this surveillance because I saw him coming and going. Then I caught him somewhere else, and he had something he was dirty about, and he thought I might know it, so he started talking to me. So he starts telling me stuff about Spiro's, because he said Spiro was meeting this other guy, his cousin, who has a meat locker, and they really want to get this guy out of the penitentiary named Arab, called him the Arab. His name is Krigo, and they got him out, and he said, I met the guy. He said, man, that's the scariest man I ever met. Mentioned a couple other guys that were professional criminals that Spiro was recruiting in, and then another guy was just like a contractor that was being recruited in. So out of that surveillance, we identified all these people. Then all of a sudden the war starts popping off between the Spiros and the Savellas.
And why did they get into a war?
Because I think it went back to the oldest brother, Nick Spiro, had been killed.
Gotcha.
He was a victim of a hit.
Gotcha.
Found him in his trunk, I guess, up north of the river, over in the village of Oakview. And he was Nick Savella. Informants were saying at the time that Nick didn't really like him. He had liked him. Everybody liked him at one time. He was making him money off they're stealing truckloads of stuff from the Yellow Freight. And he was making them money, but he also was kind of his own guy. And as hard as this may be to believe, Nick Savella was incredibly conservative, and he had an standing order that any of his guys, or you were going to come around the trap, you couldn't have facial hair, and you had to dress, with polyester Sansabelt slacks and pullover polo shirt, and just real conservative. What they deemed would be the proper dress. Well, Nick Sparrow, he would wear bell bottoms and flowery clothes and had a big Fu Manchu and long hair, and there were informants saying that nobody trusts him anymore ever since he turned into a fucking hippie. Nobody trusts him, and then all of a sudden he ends up dead. There's a variety of reasons why it might have been, but bottom line is he ended up dead, and he has three brothers out there. If you're going to go kill one brother, you better kill them all.
Yeah.
So he's got three brothers out there, Joe, Mike, and Carl. There's actually another one that never got involved in that stuff, was a fireman. But these other three brothers did start getting involved in this thing with Savella. So Carl, he was a career criminal, and he came out of the penitentiary after Nick got killed, and then he starts building up this gang. And I interviewed this one guy that we identified out of that surveillance. I just called him into Blue Springs Police Department because he was a Peckerwood. He wasn't Italian. He was a basement contractor. Didn't seem to have a record. And we found out later that he was really working hard to be a drug dealer. But at that time, we didn't know that. And we just called him, come on down, I want to talk to you. And he told me, he said, Carl Spiro, he's going to be moving on to Savellas. He's trying to recruit me in on that. And he said, I don't really want any part of that. Of course, meantime, he's trying to be a drug dealer, and he gets killed about 2 years later in some kind of a drug thing. But, we get all those guys, and we get this information about these people getting put together with Spiro. So you pull that out, and you're feeding that to the FBI. And then, some of the first shots get fired in the Spiro-Savella war. And, the first, really, the big one, there was one that a guy named Johnny Brocado was found in his trunk up at the airport, and when they got him, and he had signs that he'd been tortured. He had some cigarette burns and stuff on his body, and his contents of his stomach were still frozen. This was like November. It wasn't like that cold out. So they'd actually obviously kept him in a meat locker. Well, about the same time, the Savellas own a meat locker, Brandon Martin Savella BNC Meats, and the guy that runs it's a bookie for him and always has a lot of cash money, and somebody robs him. And you remember I said something about there was a guy named called the Arab, or Leonard Crago, that Savella or Spiro wanted out of the penitentiary. And this guy robs Al Brandemeyer. He puts him in the trunk of his Lincoln, and he has two guns, and he starts shooting into the trunk, and he's yelling, "You tell Nick Savella that the Arab's back in town," and he doesn't hit the guy. Somehow he got around behind the spare tire or something. His grandson told me this. I read the police report at the time, and he did, and this guy did say that. Well, this Arab is the same guy that Carl Spiro had gotten his cousin to put him on paper as be working at his meat locker. He had a meat locker too. I guess it's become a popular business among mob guys, is this meat business. And he had given him this job, but he really didn't go there. He was just a criminal, is all he was. And he robbed Al Brandemeyer for Carl Spiro. It was like, fly in the face of Nick Savella to have this guy go rob him and yell that kind of stuff out. It's kind of unheard of. So those are like the first shots in the war. And then about a year later, 1978, three Spiros, the three that are out, Joe, Mike, and Carl, are all at the Virginia Tavern at Admiral in Virginia. And somebody drops a dime on them, lets them know that they're down there, and three masked men come in the back door, When they walk in, they see that Carl Sparrow's standing up by the phone by the front door, and they look to their left, and there's like a bunch of the bars on the right, and there's a bunch of tables and chairs on the left, and a pool table and all that. And they see the other two brothers sitting over there. So two of the guys peel off to the left and just start shooting at the Mike and Joe. And Carl sees what's going on, and he throws down the payphone and boogies out the front door across Admiral Boulevard. And he couldn't get hidden very well. He should have taken a quick right and then tried to run around back of the Virginia, but he went straight across Admiral Boulevard. Well, the guy with the shotgun got to get to the front door, and he pops him as he gets across. Just as he got to the other side of Admiral Boulevard, and he pops him, and he goes down. Three guys run out, jump in their car, and run off, and we find the car and the mask and the guns about 3 or 4 blocks later. Typical mob deal. They always get rid of the guns as soon as they get away, and anything else that connects them back to that crime, they throw it away. And Carl Sparrow, there was 2 policemen came up on him right after this happened, and they asked him, "Well, what happened, Carl?" And he wouldn't. He said, "I'm not talking." And he's crippled from his waist down the rest of his life, but he never slowed down. He came back out after he was crippled like that, and the war continued, and they kept stalking each other. And he was driving around this Cadillac with hand controls on it, and he's doing the same stuff.
I've always wondered whenever they say they get rid of the weapons, what do they do with them? Have you guys ever been able to recover any?
Yeah, they just throw them out.
They just throw them out?
You'll find them.
Like throw them in the river, or they just throw them?
On the way.
Just
on the way. This is before DNA.
Okay.
I don't know what they do now. They probably, I mean, if it's a clean gun, I mean, you've cleaned it really well and never touched it with anything. I've talked to guys today that are in the life, and they say, you can't get away with anything anymore. And when's the last time you heard of a mob murder?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I haven't seen anything of a bar getting shot up by mob guys.
Right,
so.
But back then, see, they keep the gun long enough to get away, mm-hmm. and then get rid of it.
Yeah. And
the stocking mask too, and see then. They threw away the stocking mask too, and you got all that DNA in those stocking masks, but it wasn't that sophisticated at that time when they did that. So
they end up saving any of that DNA though for the future of having that.
I don't think so.
No. So how long did that war last?
That went on. See, the next little kind of a flurry of stuff. Joe Sparrow had recruited a couple of guys, non-Italians. And one of them was a police informant. Had been a long-time police informant for one of our guys. Guy down actually started in the vice unit, and he was in career criminal by then. And so intelligence unit then helped him with their surveillance on it, because he was reporting that he now was somehow had gotten connected with Joe Sparrow through some other criminal activity, and now Joe was wanting him to help put a bomb on Tuffy DeLuna, who's the underboss. This guy's in over his head, so he's telling our policeman about it. All of a sudden, I forgot his name, but anyhow, it's in my movie. Get my movie. Clark Hamilton. He tells Clark Hamilton, and Clark Hamilton is his control, and he's reporting everything that's going on. So they're, he said, man, they got some dynamite, they got a bomb, and they're going to do it. And Joe's bragging about how he happened to be driving. He was drunk one night, out late, and he was driving by Tuffy's house, and he saw Tuffy park his car and walking in the house. So he had a deer rifle, and he pulled a deer rifle out as fast as he could and took a shot at him, but missed him. It's funny, we had Clark Hamilton, an ATF agent, went by Tuffy's house right after that happened, and they knew about this. They said, well, anybody take a shot at you recently? And he said, well, no, and not that I know of. And he said, well, what about that hole down there? Well, I don't know what that is. So they're like really focused on Tuffy. Mm-hmm. And it's coming up on a year after that Virginia Tavern incident where they killed Mike. I think I forgot to say that. They wounded Joe, crippled Carl, but they killed Mike, this oldest brother, who really was not quite as involved as Carl was, for sure. He was a Teamsters business agent, which is another reason that there was problems, because I think the Sparrows, huge amount of power. If you've got some kind of offices within the Teamsters Union, you can give out jobs, you can get people's jobs, you get truckloads of property set up and knocked off, and
they were the most powerful union back then. Weren't they?
Yeah, and the Sparrows were not letting. I mean, the Savellas really controlled the Teamsters Union. They controlled Roy Lee Williams, who was the central power figure in the Teamsters locals here in Kansas City, and and the Spiros were wanting more union jobs. They want more control of them for themselves.
And explain who the Teamsters Union is so everybody knows.
The Teamsters Union, it would be all the truck drivers and all the dock workers at the time in the United States. Started by Jimmy Hoffa back in the 30s, I think. And had this long relationship with the Mafia. Started with Hoffa. He was connected to the Detroit Mafia. And, Chicago and Kansas City and St. Louis, all the local Teamsters were connected to whatever mob family was in that city. And so the mob guys would get jobs, and they kind of trade off. The union would, the mob guys, if they had trouble with a contract with a business, mob guys, they don't care about the rules. They'll go in and blow the place up. Mm-hmm. Their intimidation factor. And also it helps keep the people like Hoffa and the people who are in power, it helps keep them in power. Because the mob guys, there's always that hammer that can come down on you if you don't support, whoever your business agent is or whoever your representative is. You got to support the guy that the mob wants in there.
How accurate do you think that that movie on Netflix was about Jimmy Hoffa? Was that pretty close? Did you see that?
Oh, there's been several, more than one.
That one that came out, The Irishman?
Oh, yeah, okay, that's right. All right.
What'd you think of that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That Frank Sheeran guy.
What they call Irishman, that guy? The painter or something like that?
I Hear You Paint Houses was the name of the book. And he claims that that's what people would ask him when they wanted to hire him. I don't believe a bit of it. I think that old guy, he probably did a few things, kind of nasty things. He was Hoffa's driver and Hoffa's buddy and off and on. He didn't drive him all the time, but he could be around Hoffa. And he was a leg breaker. Unions always need these leg breakers and keep people in line. And he was that guy, but he certainly, when they said he killed Joey Gallo in Umberto's Clam House in Manhattan, it's like, no, he didn't do that. And they're saying that, and he said that as a fact, that I did that, and a variety of other crimes. And he was a Peckerwood. He was not part of the family. They're not going to take him on an operation to kill Jimmy Hoffa.
And what's a Peckerwood? You said a non-Italian?
Peckerwood's not Italian, yeah. It's made in kind of a Kansas City opera. They all in Kansas City, the Italians will call us Peckerwoods.
Oh, really? Because I've heard Peckerwood before, like in prisons.
Yeah.
They usually call
kind of
the white guys
redneck
Peckerwoods.
White guy, yeah.
Yeah. Or the Nazis, or what do they call it? The Aryan Brotherhood?
Aryan Brotherhood, yeah.
Okay. So you don't think Jimmy Hoffa then went out that way? I've heard of other theories too, him being buried under the Jet Stadium, I think it was, or something like that. Some weird.
The Meadowlands, yeah. And then there's the famous story about him being this guy really pushed this until recently underneath the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, because Tony Provenzano was a Teamster from New Jersey and a Genovese mob guy, and he hated he and Hoffa had this big battle, and they were in prison together, and they had a fight, and Hoffa refused to let him draw a Teamster's pension after he'd been convicted of a variety of crimes against the union, was in the penitentiary for it, and Hoffa made sure that he didn't get to draw a Teamster's pension, and he hated him, and he did have something to do with him being killed that day. He was involved in that meeting that day, but this one guy claims that he wanted to bring Hoffa's body back to New Jersey because he was a New Jersey guy, so he could drive by it and say, "There's Jimmy Hoffa." But I don't believe that either. And they went out and searched for it big time, and nobody's ever found it.
What do you think happened?
Oh, they killed him that day. It was that guy named, I can't think of, Sally Bugali, I think. He was a Detroit guy. See, Hoffa was owned by Detroit. See, if you're in the mob, if Roy Lee Williams was owned by Kansas City, if you couldn't in the mob, you couldn't from another city go to Roy Lee Williams. You had to go to Nick Savella, because Nick Savella owns Roy Lee Williams. If you're in Chicago, Alan Dorfman and his dad, Red Dorfman, and a few other Teamsters up there, they were owned by the outfit. Chicago, they always call they don't call it the Mafia in Chicago, they always call it the outfit. Just like in Detroit, they call it the partnership.
Gotcha.
Here, we call it the outfit quite a little bit here too. I think we have a lot of Chicago influence. But they owned Alan Dorfman. If you're going to go Alan Dorfman for something, you got to go through the outfit up there. So Hoffa was developed and historically owned by and connected to Detroit. So if he's a problem, and he was becoming a problem, so they had this other guy, Frank Fitzsimmons had been the executive director or president of the Teamsters Union, and he was real amenable. He liked to go play golf. The mob guys could just get away with anything, and they'd gotten themselves in a position where they could get anybody a loan, a big loan out of that pension fund. And that's the whole casino backstory behind Casino. They'd gotten loans for the guy, Alan Glick, that bought the Stardust, and gotten a loan, $62 million loan to a guy that was a 36-year-old, small developer. He didn't have the wherewithal to get that loan on his own, but he could go to the mob, and they could get it for him because they owned these different Teamsters around there. Mm-hmm. So Hoffa comes out of the penitentiary, makes that deal with Richard Nixon, and Nixon, part of the deal was you can't have any union activities for 5 more years. Well, Hoffa didn't want to wait. He wanted to get back and take these union back. He felt like he owned that union because he started it, and he had a real proprietary interest. And Fitzsimmons, he was just blah, blah, okay, whatever. He was just going along. He'd get along to go along, and he's that kind of guy. Hoffa wanted to get that union back, so he was making some moves to get back into the union and take it over. And the mob guys did not want him back in because that was going to mess up their little piggy bank up here in the Teamsters Pension Fund. It's like $1 billion fund that they were able to get loans out of for people. And, you go in and just put the word into your guys. Then whoever wants a loan goes and gets a loan. Mm. Then they get kickbacks from those loans from that guy who got that loan. Huge.
I'm pulling that mic up real quick.
Huge pot of gold for them to play around with. They weren't stealing money out of the union. They were just influencing who they got loans to, and then they get their money from the person that got the loan. So Hoffa wants to get back in, and they know that Hoffa probably crack down and won't let them do what they've been doing. And it's Detroit's problem. He's their guy. It's your problem. You take care of it. Mm-hmm. That's the mob.
And so they took care of it.
So they took care of it. Yeah. And I don't know what happened to his body. I was in a hole. I flew me back to New York. Or was it New York or was it L.A.? One of the two. Flew me out, and History Channel did a whole show on where's Jimmy Hoffa's body. So I had to go in there and give my little spiel about, some of the things I just said and about where his body was.
Huh. That's crazy. So I know we kind of redirected, to Jimmy Hoffa, but so you were saying Spiro and the Savellos were getting into the teams, or, had control of the Teamsters Union. So during the war. So what came of that? Like what happened after
they killed all the Spiros off? They killed all the Spiros off.
Oh, did they? That's how it ended?
That's how it ended. Man. They tried to bomb Tuffy, and they didn't get that done because the informant set him up, and we arrested him, and then he had a bunch of extra dynamites hidden in the Liberty Bend storage facility, and he went out there one day, and we don't know. Some mob guys claim that they set it off, but a bunch of dynamite went off at the Liberty Bend storage facility while he was in his storage facility and blew his car clear up and blew the whole end of that storage facility out. There's like a case of dynamite out there. Really? And then about 2 years after that, Carl Spiro was running a little used car lot down at 12th and Chestnut right by the Shady Lady. And he went in his little shack, rolled his wheelchair out and rolled it up in his little shack, and a bomb went off and blew him clear out through the top and dumped him down in the parking lot out in front, and he's along with his wheelchair. So that's the end of that war. And at the same time, the Bureau's been working on all the skimming from Las Vegas, and they take all that down about that time, like 79 or 80. We served search warrants on all the main mob guys in Kansas City.
Isn't that what your documentary's on?
You're right. The first one's on that. Gangland Wire is about the problems in the River Key, and then how we learned that the skim was coming to Kansas City, and then how that developed. Mm-hmm. And then the second one is the Savello-Spiro War, brothers against brothers. So
And you can get those on your...
I got them on, of course, I've got nobody wants a DVD anymore.
I still collect them.
I sell DVDs. Yeah. I've got a few left. I'm going to have to order some more. I'm kind of almost out.
I'm going to have to get one of those from you.
And then I got them on Amazon. You get them $1.99 rental on Amazon. That's mainly cool. What people do.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you said they had connection with Las Vegas then, right? Kansas City. So that scene in Casino was real then, right? Where they kind of had that Kansas City scene of them, what was that, in a butcher shop or something that? They were having a meeting?
It was somewhat like that. Only it was not in the butcher shop. The scene where they pan the camera up and they show the hidden microphone up an event, right? And there's two guys talking. One's bitching about how he got to go to Las Vegas. I think that was supposed to be Tuffy DeLuna, and the other one was supposed to be Cork Savella. He was complaining about how he had to keep going out and how he'd write down all of the expenses and said, what do you keep records for? Are you going to pay taxes? And see, that's all, ripped from reality. But in fact, the Bureau had put a hidden microphone in a little pizza place at Independence and Prospect called the Villa Capri. And it was a hangout for all the Savella people. They were, anytime you want to drive by there in the evening especially, there'll be some of them there. And they had, the Bureau had an informant that talked about how he had some dirty conversations where Cork had hired him and another guy to go plant a stick of dynamite underneath the strip club car's owner because Cork was wanting to extort money from him. So we were having this Savella-Spiro war going on, and we had another thing going on, which I don't really even want to go into because it really confused everybody. And there'd been some stalking and some planning and some talking about how do you get these Spiro boys? How are you going to get these Spiros? Because they're trying to get us. And they knew that they always met at this one place, and they this one banquet, a table and chairs and a banquet. So they put a microphone there, hoping they'd pick up information about plotting to murder somebody. Well, they didn't get that. That's when they picked up $25 million, Teamsters, are we in on that with them? Oh, you were out there when Lefty cashed that check. Oh, what's Genius going to do? And Jay Brown was there. So it was easy for him to then call out to Las Vegas and find out Lefty was Lefty Rosenthal. Jay Brown was a lawyer for the Stardust. Genius was probably Alan Glick, the guy that owned the Stardust. And so he could start putting that together out of that one intercept right there. And then they got another intercept not too long after that, and they were talking about some of the same stuff. And Tuffy said, I got to go find a phone. Well, there's a pay phone right there, but he didn't use that phone there. And so they knew that he had some kind of a safe phone out there. And so we put a big surveillance on Tuffy for about 2 weeks and caught him at a bank of payphones in a hotel over here at I-435 and Front Street. Hotel's torn down there, and now it used to be the Smuggler's Inn right next to it. And I can't remember the name of that, about a 6 or 8 story hotel right off of 435. Caught him on payphones there and then put taps on it. And then it was like a gold mine. Tuffy was calling this guy named Joe Augusto out at Las Vegas, and he was just feeding him everything about the skim and everything that was going on. And then out of that tap, then they spent off onto another phone. Some lawyers' offices downtown. Nick would go into John Patrick Quinn and People's office, and Quinn was his lawyer, but Quinn was usually not there at the office unless they had a case pending. He liked to go play golf, and he didn't go in the office every day unless he just did white collar crime, and he was kind of a real high end lawyer that didn't work a lot, and he let him use his office to go in and just have meetings and use his phone. He didn't get anything out of it. Nobody ever, he was a lawyer, he was just a lawyer. He wasn't anything else, but he did let him do that. But they got on that phone, and it was another gold mine. Then they caught him making arrangements for this Joe Augusto and Carl Thomas, who were really running the skim out there, to come back to Kansas City. And then they got a microphone in that place where they were having that meeting, and then that just socked it in. I mean, they sat there and discussed exactly how you do the skim and who's going out and getting it and bringing it back. And
I feel like that's rule number one. Don't talk on the phones, right? Did they not?
Don't
did
talk
they not
anywhere.
know that? Yeah. Did they not know that?
Well, they took precautions.
Yeah.
They didn't go to payphones.
But you guys had those tapped.
And they went to the lawyer's office. They thought that was cool too.
I see.
But you can listen as long as the lawyer isn't on there. They're not.
How hard was that to get a wiretap?
Oh,
what was that called? That's a wiretap, right?
Yeah, it's wiretap. Yeah. You got to get an order or a hidden microphone's the same thing. So technical surveillance they use. It's under Title III because they call them T3s. You have to get probable cause. You have to say, okay, there has been. Here's kind of the plot. Here's what we think they're doing. They use this phone. Are they sitting here and they talk? We know that they've got some kind of, we've picked up enough tidbits from walking by or from informants to know that there's dirty conversation that's going to lead us on down this case a little farther. And they're furthering this plot, this criminal conspiracy. And there's no other ways to get this but put a microphone in or get on the phone. And you can get it. And you get it for 30 days. And then you have to justify it every 30 days to get it renewed. It's really difficult to do. It's really hard to do.
So after the war, the Savellas came out on top. And what was it like after that? Did it kind of settle down? Was everybody everything calm in the city after that?
Yeah, it was just dead after that.
Dead after that.
So the Spiros were gone. There hadn't been maybe one mob-connected murder since. So
really, and so to this day, because that was what year when it ended? You said 70.
Oh, Carl Spiro was actually killed. That's when it would have ended. Carl Spiro was killed in, I want to say, 84.
Okay. And then after that, just kind of got quiet.
Yeah, real quiet.
So is that family right now still active? I mean, can you talk about that? Or
yeah, I don't really like to.
No, that's fine.
They're here.
Yeah, they're around. Okay.
Yeah, they're around.
Okay. Yeah, I've always wondered that because you don't hear much anymore about it. But how bad was they had ties politically, right? Not just through the union, but politically as well.
Yeah, up until probably by the 70s, they were just about. That was about the end of it.
About the end of it? Okay. And what about police-wise? You always hear about police corruption. Yeah. How bad was that here in Kansas City?
You know, it really wasn't that bad. They had their people for a period of time, and back into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, when Clarence Kelly, the former FBI agent, took over the police department as chief. He sidelined a lot of those guys that were kind of connected, shall we say, to the mob, and mainly it was through gambling. They wouldn't hit their gambling spots and that kind of thing. So and that after a few years of that, and they got older, and it just that all dried up. And after that, it was if we had anybody, it was somebody that just was drinking in the wrong place, and it had some loose lips.
And I feel like Kansas City's kind of small, so that would kind of go around pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, man, that's a lot. That's a lot to take in, is. Man. That's a big story, man. So you have. Well, we talked about 2 documentaries, you said? 2
documentaries.
And then you have Gangland Wire as well, correct?
Gangland Wire podcast, and I have the documentary.
And I've seen that you also do other things as well, other history on the Ku Klux Klan, and also you did one on the Underground
Railroad. Yeah, I did.
So you're kind of a history buff. You kind of go through all that.
Amateur, self-taught history
that's cool.
buff.
That's cool. Well, hey, man, Gary, I appreciate you being on.
Oh, I've got a book, too.
Oh, do you?
Leaving Vegas. It's on Amazon. Leaving Vegas, how FBI wiretaps ended mob domination of Las Vegas casinos. So I'm going to get my last plug in there.
Awesome. And then you have the app as well where you kind of go around.
the Kansas City Mob Tour app. Sometimes I don't know. Some people said it didn't work, and then I tried it myself, and I had to delete it and then re-download it, and it's only on Apple. It's not on Android, so I don't know. Try it.
Awesome. Anything else coming up that you want to talk about? Or?
I'm not just doing my podcast.
Doing your podcast?
Just doing my podcast.
Yeah, and we'll have everything in the bio as well, your Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff, so I'll have that in there.
Yeah, my Facebook group has just gone crazy lately. It's like 24,000 people now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It just went nuts.
And what do you guys do on there? You just kind of share stories? And
we just put up pictures of mob stuff. And
it's not only Kansas City related, I see. It's all around.
It's all over the United States. It's hardly any Kansas City stuff because it's, with that many people, there's a big contingency from New York and Chicago. So those are the most popular ones. I mean, put John Gotti up there, and people just comment and like and share.
That's awesome. Well, hey, man, I was happy to have you on. We learned a lot today. Right. I hope to have you on again. Okay, maybe talk about some of the other stuff that you've done too. So,
all right, cool.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right,
thanks.